Hey there, and welcome to my channel. I'm Ashley Willingham, a sinner saved by grace, and an author of clean Christian fantasy romance books filled with adult characters, action, adventure, on-page prayer, and God's truths. You're listening to the free serialized audiobook for Ink and Ivy, my cozy Christian fantasy romance, Book One in the Gracehaven series. Don't forget to like and subscribe. God bless and enjoy.
This book is dedicated to Heather Carpenter, Ashley Turnquest, and Holly Howell. Thank you, ladies, for being such an inspiration. Chapter 1. A low, collective murmur rumbled at the edges of her senses. Not the usual early morning clatter of baking pans or Marigold's bright humming drifting up through the floorboards, but the sound of many voices rising and falling in an agitated drone. Like the buzzing of so many bees. Ivy blinked herself awake, her mind still fuzzy with sleep. Morning sun spilled across the patchwork quilt Grandma Evelyn had gifted her 5 Christmases ago, illuminating the intricate pattern of trees and stars the older woman had stitched just for her. The warm, buttery aroma of caramelizing sugar and spiced apples unfurled from downstairs, already making her mouth water. Apple fritters. Marigold always made the best apple fritters. She almost let herself sink back into the pillows to bask in the scent, but the collective buzz from the street swelled again, vibrating against the glass of her window. She frowned and glanced at the wall clock hanging across the room next to her sprigs of drying herbs and her latest to-do list for the week she kept forgetting to check. Had she accidentally slept in again? Was the Friday morning rush already pouring in through the bakery doors downstairs? The rhythmic tick of the clock echoed in the quiet room, its ornate black hands resting firmly at 6:30. The Honeybloom Bake Shop didn't open until 7. Ivy pushed her covers aside and swung her legs out of bed, her toes sinking into the plush rug underfoot. Snatching her cashmere shawl from where it draped over the back of her desk chair, barely avoiding knocking over the precarious tower of empty teacups teetering next to her mortar and pestle, she hurried across the polished wood floor toward the window. But she didn't make it far before she tripped over a stack of herbal encyclopedias haphazardly positioned just beside her desk. A stack she had meant to return to the library weeks ago. Hissing through her teeth, she stumbled forward, her hands slapping against the wall beside the window frame to catch her balance. The dull throb in her big toe pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Today. She would finally return those books today. Ignoring her pain, Ivy wrapped her shawl around her shoulders to hide the sight of her nightgown from view before she twitched aside the lace curtains and pushed the glass panes outward. Gracehaven's main thoroughfare sprawled below. A cobblestone street lined with cheerful little shops and townhouses leading toward the silhouettes of the town hall, the library, and the Gracehaven church framing the town square in the near distance. The morning breeze, heavy with the scent of blooming lilacs, teased her long green hair as she leaned out over the sill. By all accounts, it was shaping up to be a lovely day. The sun was bright. The air was sweet. But when she spotted the murmuring crowd clustered tightly around the front doors of the vacant building on the corner, her stomach plummeted to the floor. The corner shop. It had sat wonderfully, perfectly vacant since the Wright family had moved to Honeygrove last year to be nearer to their relatives. Just an empty storefront with dusty windows and peeling green paint. The only empty storefront in all of Gracehaven. The very storefront she had been saving up all year to purchase. She loved Marigold dearly, and being able to share the apartment above the bakery with her dearest friend was a blessing she cherished. But sharing a space wasn't the same as having her own. She needed a place that could finally be hers, just hers. A place where she could build a life of her own, where she could put down roots at last without being a burden on anyone else. A place that would finally feel like home. The first real home she'd had since her parents passed away 15 years ago. Since she'd had to start going by her mother's maiden name to avoid being swept away from all she had ever known and transported to the capital for safekeeping, along with all the other half-human orphans after the Troll Wars first began all those years ago. Since she'd become a burden on every single one of her friends, helping her hide from Lord Regent Orevan Locke's sanctuary edict in plain sight. Her chest tightened as she scanned the sky above the shop, squinting against the sunlight. Had the one-winged Pegasus escaped from the magical creature sanctuary again and crashed through the roof? Or even worse, had Bastian Hayes come down with another cold? The dragon shifter was the town's blacksmith, and while his ironwork and his charming brotherly demeanour were unparalleled, his sneezes were a public hazard. Had he walked past the shop and accidentally set it ablaze? She shuddered at the thought. Though she was only half dryad, with brown human skin rather than pretty bark of her own, she had inherited her mother's innate, paralysing fear of fire. But there was no smoke, no scent of char on the breeze. So then why all the fuss? Please, she prayed, her hold on her shawl tightening. Please let it be all right. A flash of brown fur trotted toward the edge of the crowd, fluffy tail twitching with purpose. A brown tabby cat, but not just any brown tabby cat. "Charles!" she shouted after the feline, earning a mere flick of his ears and nothing more. Pursing her lips, she sweetly corrected, "Sir Charles?" The cat immediately stopped and swiveled to face her, his bright smile flashing in the early morning light.
"Good morning, Miss Fairwood."
Sir Charles Harrington, one of the Fablekin and quite proud of having been knighted by the Lord Regent for his service during the Troll Wars, called back.
"Lovely day today, is it not?"
"Yes, quite," she agreed, fighting against the urge to bounce her leg with her mounting impatience. Sir Charles was ever a stickler for niceties, even when there was something far more pressing at hand. Like half the town gathered outside her future shop. "What seems to be the commotion in front of the old Wright place?" she asked, fighting to keep her tone casual, to keep her voice from hitching with audible worry. She failed. Sir Charles tilted his head to the side, his ears twitching once more.
"I fear I don't know, Miss Fairwood, though I was just heading that way myself. Perhaps we might find out together."
The invitation was barely out of the fable cat's mouth before she blurted out, "Yes, I'll be right down." Chapter 2. Ivy clattered down the wooden staircase toward the ground floor, wincing as her stiff ankle boots struck each step. She hated these boots. The leather pinched her heels and trapped her toes. If only she had hooves like Daphne, she could get away with trotting barefoot through Gracehaven's cobblestone streets without drawing a single second glance. Then again, hooves would mean never feeling the soft, dew-dampened grass of the forest between her toes again. A tragic trade-off. One she wasn't quite willing to make. As she reached the bottom landing, the drone of the crowd outside grew distinctly louder, humming faintly against the stairwell walls. Her hands instinctively buried themselves in the skirts of her dress, taking comfort in the familiar swish of the soft sage-green cotton, densely embroidered with trailing vines, daisies, and peach roses. It was fine. Everything was fine. It simply had to be fine. Drawing in a deep breath to steady herself, she pushed the door open and stepped out into the bakery. The Honey Bloom Bake Shop was a sanctuary of warmth, made even more so by the sight of Marigold in all her sun-fey glory, pressed against one of the large front windows, her hands cupping her face to block the glare as she craned her neck to peer down the cobblestone street. Morning sunlight poured through the arched windows, casting delicious pools of golden light across the scattered round tables and mismatched wooden chairs. Through the swinging door behind the front counter that led to the kitchen, the tantalizing scent of freshly glazed apple fritters taunted her further, making her stomach rumble. But even the promise of Marigold's fritters couldn't stop her mind from racing. Perhaps the crowd outside had nothing to do with the corner shop at all. Perhaps someone had just collapsed there on the street corner and was in need of her medicinal aid. "Grandma Evelyn!" she gasped, freezing in her tracks. Marigold jumped, her gossamer wings flaring with a sharp snap of gold as she spun around. Her best friend practically glowed in the morning light, her rich russet skin shimmering with a warm inner luminescence. Beneath the halo of her dark brown curls, her golden eyes flew wide. "Ivy, you nearly gave me a heart attack, but what about Grandma Evelyn?" "The crowd," Ivy fretted, waving her hands toward the street visible beyond the windows. "What if it's Grandma Evelyn?" She didn't have to finish the thought before Marigold's face crumpled with their shared worry. Evelyn Caldwell, the owner of the Wisteria Inn and Tea House, was one of only 2 full-blooded humans left in Gracehaven, one of the last humans in all of the kingdom of Luminara, and she was well into her 80s. For a single, breathless beat, she and her best friend merely stared at each other. Then, moving as one, they bolted for the front door. Marigold didn't even bother taking off her flour-dusted apron before she grabbed the brass doorknob and wrenched it open. Together they burst out into the morning air, the cheerful tinkling of the bakeshop bell instantly swallowed by the rumble of the crowd down the street. A quiet hiss sounded from below. Ivy's boots skidded on the cobblestones as she drew herself to a halt mere moments before crashing right into Sir Charles. The brown tabby leapt gracefully to the side, his ears flattening against his skull for a fraction of a second before he recovered his usual aristocratic poise.
Miss Fairwood, Miss Dawn,
he greeted, his whiskers twitching.
Is something amiss?
The crowd, Sir Charles, she softly reminded him, her voice tight with barely suppressed panic. What would they all do if they lost Grandma Evelyn? Oh, poor Felix. Gracehaven's postmaster was the only one in town actually related to Grandma Evelyn, though the older woman enjoyed pretending as if she were a grandmother to them all.
Of course,
Sir Charles murmured, dipping his furred head.
Right this way, ladies. Let us see what all the fuss is about.
The fable cat promptly trotted off down the street, his fluffy tail plumed like a banner as he went. Without a word, Marigold took her hand and offered up a squeeze that was no doubt meant to be comforting, even though her friend's fingers were trembling nearly as badly as hers. But still, the sun-phased skin was a steadying furnace, a deep, radiant warmth that kept her thoughts firmly tethered to the present instead of spiralling further. The cheerful charm of Gracehaven was nothing but a blur in her periphery as they hurried along in Sir Charles's wake. A mere colourful streak of wrought-iron lampposts, threaded with flowering vines and storefront window boxes overflowing with vibrant spring blooms. As she passed, the tightly curled buds along the street suddenly burst into brighter, fragrant life, instinctively responding to the half-dryad blood humming in her veins. But up ahead, the press of bodies blocked everything else from view.
Excuse me,
Sir Charles called out, weaving his small frame expertly through the throng of legs and skirts.
Do pardon us. Ah, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. Good day, good day. Do make room for Miss Fairwood and Miss Dawn, if you'd please.
The sea of townsfolk slowly parted, murmuring warm greetings and shifting aside to make room for their trio amidst the cluster of bodies before the storefront. Ivy braced herself, her eyes darting across the cobblestones, searching frantically for any sign of Grandma Evelyn. But there was nothing. No glimpse of anyone collapsed on the sidewalk. No whiff of Bastion's dragonfire unfurling from the eaves. No whinny of the one-winged Pegasus trapped inside the store. A wave of relief crashed over her, instantly loosening the suffocating knot in her chest. But in the very next breath, that sweet relief turned to dry ash in her mouth. Stacked haphazardly across the walkway in front of the corner shop was a towering pile of wooden moving crates, each one bearing the bold, dark seal of the Veritas Shipping Company. And worse. Hanging squarely in the centre of the dusty front window of her future shop was a crisp, white sign. A sign adorned with a single word scrawled in bright red paint. Sold. Chapter 3. Ivy slouched over her cup of morning tea, letting the bergamot-scented steam bathe her face as she stared at the veritable feast of sugary delights before her on the table. Marigold's famous apple fritters, perfectly crisp at the edges and soft in the middle, filled with spiced apples and covered in a delicate vanilla glaze. Fresh fruit tarts, bursting with sweetness and custard cream, and buttery cookies stuffed with honeyed nuts. She couldn't eat a single bite. The Honeybloom Bake Shop buzzed with energy, entirely at odds with the hollow ache in her chest. The Friday morning rush had descended in full force, and the air was thick with the clatter of porcelain, and the excited, soaring hum of town gossip. Gracehaven had a new resident, 2 in fact, and the town was beside itself with the news. Ivy let out a slow breath and dragged her gaze away from her uneaten apple fritter to her father's Bible, laid open on the table beside her teacup. Its cover still bore his name, even though the words had faded over the years, Mateo Flores. She traced a finger along the gilded edge of the pages, desperately trying to focus on her morning devotional even as guilt twisted her stomach. She couldn't remember the last time she had taken the time for a morning devotional. She had just been so busy of late. But right now, she needed the absolute certainty of the word more than ever. She needed a reminder that the Lord had a plan, even when her own had just fallen to pieces. Though the Bible detailed the creation and history of faraway Earth rather than her own Luminara, the gospel of Christ was beautifully universal. A salvation her people had embraced completely when the first humans had arrived as missionaries centuries ago, carrying the Lord's truths with them through the portals from Earth. God was their heavenly Father. Jesus was the life, the truth, the way. Clinging to that truth like a lifeline, she flipped to Jeremiah, chapter 17, verse 7. But blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, whose confidence is in him. They will be like a tree planted by the water, that sends out its roots by the stream. It does not fear when heat comes. Its leaves are always green. It has no worries in a year of drought, and never fails to bear fruit. Yet the longer she stared at those words, the more the ink seemed to swim before her eyes, blurring into meaningless shapes. Why, Lord? She couldn't help but wonder. Have I not been a burden enough on my friends and neighbours? Do you have another plan for me?
Yes. Caelen Vael and his daughter, Elodie.
Mayor Halloway proudly revealed, the rich timbre of his voice cutting through the hum of conversation filling the room. The fawn sat comfortably across from her, his tufted ears twitching as he nursed his second cup of coffee. Beneath the table, one of his hooves tapped a rhythmic beat against the floorboards.
And all the way from Veritas, too.
Beside him, his wife, Mrs. Halloway, let out a soft, impressed hum and absent-mindedly straightened the gingham ribbon tied around the handle of the wicker basket sitting in the centre of the table. As was their custom, they had already packed that welcome basket for the newcomers, filling it with jars of honey, freshly baked bread, packets of her favourite chamomile and vanilla tea, a bouquet of flowers, and even a crocheted tea cosy. Clearly just as excited as her parents were by this abrupt turn of events, her dear friend Daphne leaned forward and gushed. Apparently he intends to open a stationery shop, and just in time for the wedding. Now Felix and I won't have to order invitations all the way from the capital. Ivy recoiled before she could stop herself. A stationery shop? She echoed. What need had Gracehaven for something as frivolous as a stationery shop when they didn't even have a dedicated apothecary? She had planned to fill that storefront with jars of healing salves and tinctures for coughs and aching joints, and some man from Veritas had purchased the place just so he could sell envelopes. Seeking some silent commiseration, Ivy glanced toward the woman seated to her left, Grandma Evelyn herself. The human innkeeper looked just as distinguished as ever, her bright blue dress carefully pressed, her snow-white hair neatly styled, not a single strand out of place. Seeing her sitting there, perfectly healthy and too captivated by the mayor's news to share in her dismay over the sale of the corner shop, sent a hot flush crawling up the back of Ivy's neck. And to think she had feared the woman had collapsed on the sidewalk just a half hour ago. Mayor Halloway leaned in closer over the table, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper.
Indeed. Stationery and art supplies. That was the permit the fellow put in for. Poor fellow, I might add. At least, metaphorically speaking.
He sighed.
Word has it that he's a widower. But I've already asked Mr. Brightly to invite him along to the next men's Bible study. Perhaps his daughter might make a good addition to the crochet club.
He cast a hopeful glance around the table, his gaze snagging on her for a moment. Marigold paused in the act of refilling the mayor's mug for a third time, the steaming carafe of coffee suspended in mid-air. And when did this Mr. Vael even purchase the old Wright place? It was still for sale just yesterday.
Oh, just this morning. Very early, in fact.
Mayor Halloway frowned.
It was all rather strange, actually. The paperwork was waiting for me at my office, along with far more than what the shop was worth.
The fawn let loose with a boisterous laugh.
Enough gold to purchase 3 shops, really. Though I suppose for a man of his est...
A quiet thwack sounded beneath the table, cutting the mayor off mid-sentence. Beside him, Mrs. Halloway casually adjusted the gingham ribbon on the welcome basket again, her expression the picture of serene innocence. For a man establishing a new business in an unfamiliar town, you mean, dear? She smoothly supplied. Mayor Halloway cleared his throat, his tufted ears flushing a deep crimson.
Yes, quite. An accounting error, perhaps, though I haven't yet even had a chance to meet Mr. and Miss Vael for myself. I only spoke with the lads who dropped off their things. No doubt they'll make fine neighbours. Mighty fine neighbours indeed.
Ivy's brow furrowed. She shifted her gaze between the mayor's unusually warm ears and his wife's carefully composed facade. Est. What? But the ache in her chest quickly swallowed that fleeting spark of curiosity. Whatever secret the Halloways were guarding, it didn't change the cold, hard truth. Enough gold to purchase 3 shops. The words simply added insult to injury. Even if she had scrounged every spare copper in Gracehaven to try to outbid this Mr. Vael for the purchase of the old Wright place, she never would have stood a chance against such wealth. When Daphne's gaze finally locked with hers from across the table, the bright smile on the fawn's lips evaporated. Oh, Ivy. That was the shop you were saving for, wasn't it? Her tufted ears drooped, pressing flat against her dark curls. Silence descended over the table. Suddenly, every single pair of eyes fell upon her. The weight of their collective pity was a heavy, suffocating thing, stripping her bare beneath the warm sunlight pouring in through the bakeshop windows. She couldn't bear it. They had all given her so much over the years, especially the Halloways, who had risked a great deal when they quietly replaced her birth certificate with a new one the moment the sanctuary edict was written into law. In the chaos of the Troll Wars, Lord Regent Orivan had penned the sanctuary edict with the best of intentions: to locate the kingdom's remaining human and half-human orphans left on this side of the portals and bring them to the safety of the capital. There, they were to be adopted into the highest-ranking elven families and given a life of absolute comfort, protection, and privilege. Felix, though a full-blooded human, had never been in danger of being relocated. Grandma Evelyn was his legal grandmother, his guardian. But her, if it weren't for the Halloways, she would have been taken, even though she hadn't wanted a new life amongst wealthy strangers in Veritas. Even after losing her parents, she had already discovered a true family right here in Gracehaven, amidst the quiet woods and the warm embrace of this very bakeshop. But on paper, now she was merely a half-dryad, not a half-human. She wouldn't accept anything else from her friends, not even a single ounce of further sympathy. Ivy pinned a brittle smile to her lips, doing her absolute best impression of Marigold's trademark sunny disposition. Yes, but that's no trouble at all, she forced out, the lie nearly sticking in her throat. I will simply purchase another shop. Except there were no other shops. At least none vacant. None in Gracehaven. The table erupted, all of her friends leaning in to speak over one another in a chaotic chorus of comfort. Grandma Evelyn reached out, laying a hand atop hers. Surely Mr. Brightly will always be glad to let you continue selling your tinctures out of the mercantile, dear. And my patrons absolutely adore your tea blends we serve there. Still standing behind the mayor's chair, Marigold leaned closer, her golden wings drooping sadly. You should have just let me loan you the money when we still had the chance, Ivy. Oh, I'm so sorry, Daphne lamented, her hands fluttering anxiously over her teacup. And here I am, selfishly going on about wedding invitations. What shall we do? Father? She turned a pleading stare upon the mayor. Might we strike a deal on one of the vacant plots of land on Ivy's behalf? Mayor Halloway and his wife shared a look and a nod before Mrs. Halloway looked her way and offered a maternal smile. We can surely find you a nice, empty plot of land where you can build a new shop, my dear. A shop built exactly how you would like it to be. Wouldn't that be lovely? A new shop, built exactly to her own specifications. For a fraction of a second, the idea pierced her grey mood. A bright ray of hope pricking the heavy blanket of storm clouds shadowing her thoughts. But her already racing mind snuffed out the idea just as quickly. Buying land and paying for the lumber and the labour to build a storefront from scratch would require significantly more coin than simply purchasing an existing one. The numbers were beyond her. Just trying to think of how much all of that would cost was enough to send her right temple to throbbing. Forcing her smile wider, Ivy laid her free hand atop Grandma Evelyn's, smoothing her thumb over the older woman's knuckles. Thank you. Shifting her attention to Marigold next, she met her best friend's worried golden eyes. And I couldn't have taken all your savings, Mary, not even on loan. It would have taken me years to pay it back, and what would have happened if something in the bakery had broken and needed replacing? Finally, she looked across the table to the family of fawns. Daphne, please don't apologise. You're a bride-to-be. You should be excited for the wedding. Though her cheeks were beginning to ache, she still fought to keep her smile bright when she added, And Mr. and Mrs. Halloway, thank you so much for the thought. I'll be sure to consider it. Mayor Halloway cleared his throat.
Of course, of course.
Setting his coffee aside, he rubbed the back of his neck.
However we might help with this shop business, Miss Ivy, do let us know. Mr. Bastian knows some people out in Honeygrove who do construction, after all. Excellent construction. I'll let him know that we need a quote drawn up for you.
That all sounded dreadfully expensive and pointless. But not wanting to seem ungrateful, she nodded along all the same. The mayor clapped his hands together, his smile returning.
Good. Now that we have all that settled, there is also the matter of this welcome basket.
His attention shifted toward the wicker basket, still dominating the centre of the table.
I know the task of delivering it to newcomers usually falls to you, Miss Ivy, on behalf of the Gracehaven Welcome Committee. But...
He offered an apologetic wince.
Given the circumstances, perhaps someone else could deliver it today.
The Gracehaven Welcome Committee. Ivy almost let out a laugh, though she feared it would emerge as a sob given her present mood. The Gracehaven Welcome Committee was a remarkably grand title for what was, in reality, just their Saturday evening crochet club. Just her, Marigold, Daphne and Grandma Evelyn. I can drop it off on my way to work, Daphne immediately offered. Nonsense, Grandma Evelyn insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. I can take it over right now. The morning walk will do me good. I can take it on my lunch break, Marigold chimed in. Warmth bloomed in Ivy's chest as she glanced at each of these wonderful ladies in turn. Her dear, sweet friends, oh, how she wanted to let them do it for her. The last thing in the world she wanted to do today was march up to the door of that corner shop, plaster on yet another polite smile, and pretend to be thrilled to meet some wealthy, older widower from Veritas who thought Gracehaven was in need of pretty paper instead of an apothecary. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want to even so much as look at the man who had so effortlessly taken her dream from her. She just wanted to retreat upstairs to the safety of her bed and her quilt, and not leave her bedroom for the rest of the day. But delivering the welcome baskets to Gracehaven's new residents had always been her job. And she was always happy to assist. It was the least she could do, after all Gracehaven had done for her. Besides, she was a grown woman. And grown women were meant to face their problems head-on rather than running and hiding under their blankets like children. Drawing on the warmth of her friend's sisterly love for her, Ivy forced her spine to stiffen. No, I will take it, she insisted, her voice soft but firm. Grandma Evelyn, you have guests at the wisteria expecting their morning tea. And Marigold, we both know you never take lunch breaks. The line at the counter would be practically out the door by the time you got back. And Daphne, the library is in the complete opposite direction. You'd be late to work if you took it. She didn't wait for any of them to argue with her further. Before a single word of protest could be uttered, Ivy pushed herself to her feet and reached across the table, plucking up the welcome basket. She might as well get this over with as quickly as possible. The sooner she finished, the sooner she could return to just trying to figure out what she was supposed to do now. Chapter 4. The heavy wicker basket dug a harsh, woven pattern into Ivy's palms as she marched back down the cobblestone street. Her boots clipped a frantic staccato against the stones. She needed to get this over with. If she walked fast enough, she could drop off the basket, deliver her memorized greeting, and flee before the sharp sting of her lost dream could set in again. But in the next moment, her steps faltered, slowing to a miserable, dragging scuff. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to do this. She should have just let Daphne take it for her. "Hurry up," her mind barked, and she surged forward again. "Stop," her heart pleaded, and her boots dragged once more. Swallowing down her groan, Ivy forced her gaze away from the road ahead, seeking any available distraction. To the west, beyond the winding, cheerful streets of Gracehaven, the rolling farmlands sprawled in patches of vibrant spring green and freshly tilled brown earth. To the east, the dense, familiar canopy of the forest loomed, a sea of ancient oaks and whispering pines, promising her quiet shelter, soft moss, and the comforting embrace of nature. She wanted nothing more than to hurl the basket into the nearest garden and run for the far-distant tree line.
"Good day, Miss Fairwood."
Ivy jolted, nearly spilling the basket's contents all over the street. Just to her right, sitting comfortably on the shaded front porch of the tailor's shop, were Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. The Fable Rabbits were, as always, dressed impeccably. Mrs. Whitfield in a lovely lavender day dress with a lace collar, and Mr. Whitfield in a sharp tweed waistcoat that perfectly complemented his fawn-coloured fur. Sir Charles lounged elegantly on the porch railing beside them, bathing in a patch of sunlight. Pasting on another false smile, she called back to the trio, "Good day," and hurried on, picking up her pace yet again. Finally, the corner shop loomed before her. The towering pile of Veritas crates had vanished from the sidewalk, leaving the cobblestones clear. But the shop was far from peaceful. A tremendous ruckus echoed from within the building, a heavy, wooden thump, followed by the sharp screech of furniture being dragged across the floorboards. The jarring noise momentarily overpowered the dread knotting her stomach. Ivy stepped up to the large front windows and leaned in, trying to peek through the glass. But the panes were coated in such a thick, undisturbed layer of dust that she could only make out vague, shadowy shapes shifting about the dim interior. Pulling back with a sigh, she took one last deep, shuddering breath and stepped up to the wooden door, rapping a knock against the peeling paint. "Good day, Mr. Vael," she rehearsed in her head one last time. "Welcome to Gracehaven. I'm Ivy Fairwood, delivering your welcome basket on behalf of the Gracehaven Welcome Committee." The door swung inward. All the carefully rehearsed words immediately withered on her tongue. There was no elderly widower standing in the doorway. Instead, she found herself staring up at the most breathtakingly handsome elven man she had ever seen. But not one of the wood elves who made their home in Lindenvale, those warm, boisterous people renowned for their superb parties and a deep, abiding love for the Lord's creation. No, the man standing before her was a creature straight out of the stories her mother had told her when she was a little girl. A being who had once dealt in dangerous bargains and ruthless politics in the time before the humans came to Luminara. Who surely dealt in such things again. A high elf. Her breath caught. A primal wariness spiked in her veins. What was he doing here? Had Lord Regent Orevan finally realised she was here, a half-human orphan tucked away in Gracehaven all these years, misplaced and forgotten? No, calm down. She forced her thoughts to settle before they could spiral out of control. She was a grown woman now. She had been for a long time. The sanctuary edict was no longer a threat to her. And yet to see a high elf standing in the doorway of a Gracehaven shop rather than within the gleaming halls of a proper city like Veritas, Guildenspire, or Silver Peak was jarringly irregular. But there he stood all the same, broad-shouldered and imposing, looking as if he had been painstakingly carved from pale marble by a master sculptor. His features were impossibly sharp and strikingly ageless, his cheekbones high and aristocratic beneath eyes that glittered like shards of pale blue diamonds. Hair the colour of spilled ink fell past his shoulders, save for the top half that had been swept back from his face in a series of intricate braids, leaving his elegantly pointed ears on proud display. The dark blue silk coat and ivory cravat he wore left him looking more like a nobleman than a small-town shopkeeper. And yet the morning sun didn't catch against the fine fabrics as it naturally should. In fact, the very light appeared to bend ever so slightly away from his frame, as if Gracehaven itself was afraid to draw too near. Ivy's grip tightened on the basket's handle, her mind racing. Was it a mere figment of her imagination? Or did this man truly possess a natural command of the elements, as the stories claimed? Though a faint, polite smile had rested on the elven man's lips when the door first opened, the very second his diamond-hard eyes locked onto her face, the expression vanished. His jaw ticked, hardening into unyielding stone. The air around them seemed to instantly plummet in temperature until she found it particularly difficult to breathe. Frozen in place, the heavy basket hanging forgotten from her hands, Ivy forced herself to breathlessly stammer, Mr. Vael, Mr. Caelen Vael. The man didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he gave her a slow, deliberate once-over, his gaze dragging from the toes of her hated ankle boots, up the embroidered vines of her dress, to the crown of her green hair. He snapped his cold eyes back to hers.
It depends,
he rumbled in a smooth, dark baritone, sending her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs.
On just who wants to know.